Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Lewis. I'm the curator of music and performing arts here at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Welcome to our block party. As part of the celebration of 50 years of hip-hop, we are pleased to show Graffiti Rock, a groundbreaking television, dance, and music show from 1984. What you'll be watching has been transferred from a master videotape that is in the museum's collection. Hosted by hip-hop icon Michael Holman, the video features performances by Run DMC, Shannon, Kool Moe Dee, Special K, the New York City Breakers, and DJ Jimmy Jazz. After the film, Michael Holman will take the stage for a brief presentation. Enjoy the film. My name is Stephen Lewis. I'm the curator of music and performing arts here. So please stay for a brief presentation by artist, writer, filmmaker, and musician Michael Holman, who we've just seen in the film. He's also an early 1980s downtown scene subculturalist, best known as the screenwriter of the film Basquiat and the creator of the hip-hop music program Graffiti Rock. Holman was a founding member, along with Jean-Michel Basquiat, of the experimental rock band Grey. Please join me in welcoming Michael Holman.
Thank you, everybody. Has it really been 40 years? It's like 1984. As you can see by the TV show, it was a different time in hip hop. We, us pioneers back in the day, and I think my boy Fab Five Freddy is in the house. Is he here? Yeah. My introduction to the hip hop culture was by Freddie. And it was a long time ago. It was a time when hip-hop culture was growing, was just born and growing in the Bronx. And it was a much more innocent time than what happened in the 90s, when things got rougher and harder and more street and more gangster, et cetera, et cetera. So I think Graffiti Rock really represents an earlier, more innocent time, a more party time. As you can see by the show itself, I had to make some really interesting demographic compromises in order for the show to get put onto a national stage. It was the first hip-hop TV show in the United States, 88 markets around the country. Did very well, by the way, in ratings, because there was nothing like it on TV. But still, it was an effort to sell it as a series. That was the pilot you saw, and it never went beyond the pilot. A little history, and I'd also like to open the floor to questions too, because I think you guys might have some questions that could be very interesting to answer. We made the show in 83, I think, and got it on the air. No, I'm sorry. In the early winter of 84, the early part of 84, got it on the air by the summer of 84. And what's interesting about that is by the end of the year in 84 is when an organization called NAPTE and National Association of Producers of Television Entertainment has their national conventions in Las Vegas. And that's where producers like myself and the people who were behind the show, will take their shows to Las Vegas to try to sell them as a series. And when we took it to Vegas, what you might think that happens when you sell a TV show is that you sell it to the national headquarters and it airs all over the world. Well, that's not true. Actually, TV shows are sold regionally around the country. And so what happened basically was that, for the most part, all the station managers who buy regional television shows around the country were, for the most part, white, middle-class, middle-aged white men, and they really didn't understand what the potential and the future was for hip-hop on a hip-hop TV show. They said they already had Soul Train. What was this? They didn't need another Soul Train. Rap, I heard this a number of times in Vegas, that rap music was a passing fad. It wouldn't last past 85 or 86. These were some of the excuses for why they wouldn't take the show. And interestingly, the station managers in LA said, well, you know something, we'll try it. We'll buy the show if they buy it in Chicago. And the Chicago station manager said, well, we'll buy it if they buy it in New York. So it was kind of like safety in numbers type idea. And the New York station that actually aired the show said, yeah, we'll buy it, but we want, typical to New York, X amount of tens of thousands of dollars under the table every time it airs. And my partners were like, didn't want to get in bed with that type of business. And so we went back again to NAPTI the next year to try to sell it again. And again, we were met with the same resistance. Rap is a passing fad. Can you imagine that? Rap is a passing fad. And so after that, you know, I focused on other things, went back to film school, ended up, you know, working in film and television, making music videos. But it was a labor of love. I'd always had a vision to bring hip-hop culture to television. I had been, like I said, interestingly, early on, my introduction to hip-hop culture was through Fab Five Freddy. And we actually had an interesting event, which might have been the very first time that hip-hop culture was introduced to the downtown art world in New York in 1979, April 29th, 1979. Freddie, myself, and an English expat named Stan Pescott put on a party called the Canal Zone Party, introducing the Fabulous Five, the graffiti collective that Fab Five Freddy was a part of, to the whole downtown scene. And that introduction of hip-hop culture to the downtown art scene in New York would play a very important role in spreading hip-hop culture around the world. Believe me, I really think, personally, I really think that if it hadn't been for us bringing it downtown and introducing it to our contemporaries, and by us, I mean Fab Five Freddy, Henry Chalfant, Charlie Ahern, Martha Cooper, myself, I'm really not sure that hip-hop culture would have spread around the world so quickly and would have become what it did become in the 90s and on. So that was a very important function of hip-hop culture, was its interaction with the downtown fine art scene, in which myself and Fab Five Freddy were an important part of outside of hip-hop culture. You know, it's interesting, the show, when I look at it, sometimes I cringe at some of the choices that I made, some of the choices I had to make. But, you know, sometimes I think old is gold. Things hold up in their own way, in a funny way. I am very proud of Run DMC's performance. It was their very first television performance. It was live. It was not lip-synced. It was the first time, as I said, they performed on television. I think it was one of their best performances on television. That was pretty special for me. The funny thing is, I always thought that this was the first hip-hop TV show ever. But actually, there was a cat brother in Paris in '84 who had a hip-hop TV show on public access cable TV show in Paris that aired like a couple of months before Graffiti Rock. So I'm jealous that he beat me to it. However, back in '82, I had short hip-hop TV shows on public access in New York, so I really was the first. And a couple of those shows actually were hosted by Fab Five Freddy. I would have loved to, in wrapping up my little talk about Graffiti Rock and how it happened, I would have loved to have had a chance to have made this show a regular series. I would have tapped Freddie or Mr. Magic or a number of other people, but Freddie was my first choice to take over as host. I would have really reconstructed the show in a different way. I would have had a completely different dance audience. But, you know, 2020 hindsight, what can you say? but I am proud of it. It's history. And I'd also like to open the floor to any questions for anybody that might want to know more about it. Sir or ma'am? Sir? Sir, ma'am. Hi.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you for taking the risk to do that, because that was a big risk and we needed it at that time, and I appreciate you. And staying with it and being persistent to make it happen, because we needed to be seen on all kinds of social elements that we had at that time. One of the questions that I have for you, though, was what were some of the challenges, and especially as a young artist, of promoting in the hip-hop world and how it was evolving, and seemed like you were earlier into getting us on TV. And so I just want to know some of the challenges. I know you mentioned pretty much some of the white folks not understanding what hip-hop was and then breaking it down and saying we weren't going to last, which I wish they were here today to hear that. So that's my question. Thank you.
Challenges. Well, you know, anytime you do something new, it's going to be a lot of challenges. And by the way, I'd love to have my friend Fab Five Freddy stand up and take a bow. Is he here in the house? Oh, I thought he was here in the house. Oh, he's backstage. Okay, well, let's have a hand for Fab Five Freddy, even if he's not here in the room. He was really the first person to turn me on to the game. Is he here? Oh. Freddie is right here. Some of the challenges, they just asked me about some of the challenges in putting Graffiti Rock together.
Oh boy, I've been listening.
Whew. Interestingly, at this time, 81 to 84 is a real intense time in bringing hip hop downtown and then spreading it to the rest of the world. Freddie and Charlie Ahern were making Wild Style around 81, 82. I was making my first short hip-hop film called Catch a Beat in 80, 81. And we were all downtown kids, really, part of the downtown art scene. And I was just telling them that you were my first mentor and my first introduction to hip-hop culture. And I was telling them about the Canal Zone party. And that being the real first time that hip-hop culture rubbed shoulders with the downtown art scene. Wouldn't you agree? April 29th, 1979, you know. Okay. Freddie was brought Bambaataa down to the Mud Club. I got to meet Bambaataa through Freddie, and I started to promote events as well. Freddie got more intensely into emceeing. I was much more focused on gradually on the dance, on breaking. Interestingly enough, Freddie was obviously the spokesperson and a member of the Fabulous Five, so he was heavily involved in aerosol art and writing. But one thing I wanted to say that's kind of interesting, as we were bringing this culture downtown to a very receptive and interested audience of downtown artists who were contemporaries of ours, New York City, being a media capital of the world, had a lot of foreign television documentary teams in New York, like Canal Plus from France or Paris, BBC from England, NHK Tokyo from Japan, a number of different satellite documentary crews for foreign TV stations who, if there was something happening in New York, they would go out, film it, and show it on their local national shows, just to say, here's what's going on in New York, because New York obviously is a focal part of the world. And because of that, and because of events that Freddie was putting on, that I was putting on in my club, The Grill, and those foreign documentary teams coming to capture what we were doing in this new burgeoning movement called hip-hop. It really wasn't even called hip-hop, really, until 1982. Hip-hop culture spread to Japan, to London, to Tokyo, to London, to Paris, before it went to Pittsburgh, before it came here. It was all over the world before it happened nationally in the United States, oddly enough. And so there's some interesting conversations going on in hip hop today in which people think of hip hop as rap only. I personally disagree with that. I am an OG who believes that hip hop culture is made up of the four elements of breaking, rapping, turntablism, and writing or graffiti. But at a certain point in the late 80s and 90s, there were a lot of people with money in the record business who decided to say that no, hip hop is rap and rap only. So going on past into the 90s and beyond, this whole idea that hip hop is rap and rap only sort of goes counter to this idea that I came up in and that Freddie came up in, which was that hip hop is a multifaceted movement. And so there's a disconnect and there's a conflict between those two ideas, and it's more generational than anything else. But anyway, I would love to offer another couple of questions because I think pretty soon Freddie is going to speak and introduce Wild Style, the film that he made, which was the very first hip-hop feature film. Does somebody have their hand up?
Hello. Hi, my
Hi.
name is Devar. I'm from Tampa, Florida.
Hi.
Actually, four of my friends, we came here specifically for this, to be able to experience the 50 years of hip hop. You don't know how much you have been in our households. I have two questions. First question is did Run DMC and Special K and Kumo D, did they practice that little beef? I noticed that that's what started beefing between, rap artists. And my second question is your group Gray with John Michael. I'm sorry, John Michel.
Jean-Michel.
John Michel.
Basquiat.
How was that? When I read up on him, he's very interesting, and I just wanted to know from somebody who has had a relationship with him or was his friend to just get an understanding of how was it, because the papers, media, it's very interesting, but I would love to hear your thoughts on those two.
Well, yeah, Freddie and I could both talk about that. Freddie was a very good friend of Jean's as well. To your first question, the battle. Well, battling and competition is the essence of hip hop culture, and battling with MCs was going on years before that TV show. Very interesting moment when I introduced the idea to have this battle. And first of all, LA Sunshine of the Treacherous Three, obviously there's only two in the Treacherous Three in my show. LA Sunshine was not part of the show, unfortunately. But the battle between Kumo D and Special K and Run and DMC was somewhat staged. There's an interesting backstory to that. When Kumo D was known to be a destroyer in battles. He destroyed almost anybody who he battled with. And so when Jam Master Jay found out that there was going to be a battle, he took Mo D aside and said, listen, man, take it easy on Run DMC because, they are not up to par with the level that you're at. And so it was a little bit of a contrivance. It wasn't a hardcore, serious battle. It was much more of a display, a demonstration battle, I would say. Number two, quickly and then I'll pass the microphone also to Freddie because, he has a lot, he can say a lot about Jean-Michel Basquiat. Jean-Michel was our dear friend, collaborator. I was in a band with Jean-Michel. We started the band the very night that we had the Canal Zone party, August 29th, 1979, in which Freddie and I introduced, at the very least, aerosol art and graffiti art and that part of hip-hop culture to the downtown scene. I met Jean that night. I kind of was bugging out because I was interviewing people, and And I think it was like a passive aggressive thing. I was interviewing people and I was doing this arty thing I thought was arty, asking a question, then putting the microphone in their face and then taking it away before they could answer and ask another question and I was just goofing. And I think I was like passive aggressively hostile because I didn't have any art in the show. And I felt like, that's what I think. I look back and wonder, why did I do that? Later on, I went up to Jean. I had never met him before. By the way, at the beginning of the party, he showed up before the party started and said, I want to be part of this too, because the party was really for the Fabulous Five. Lee Quiones, Fab Five Freddy, Doc, Slave, Mono, for their graffiti art to be on display and shared with the downtown scene. Jean, who's not part of the Fabulous Five graffiti collective, shows up and says, I want to be part of this too. And we were so charmed by him, and he was so confident and good looking and young and just confident that he had to be given this platform. So we put up a big piece of photo paper, gave him a can of spray paint, and he proceeded to write, which of the following are omnipresent? A, Lee Harvey Oswald, B, Coca-Cola logo, C, General Mallory, D, Samo, copyright. And we were like, okay, this is writing and graffiti on another level. This is poetry. This is deep. And I interviewed him later, and then later on I went to sort of apologize and say, hey man, I was just good. He goes, no, that's all right. You want to start a band? And I was like, yeah, and we started Gray that night. And the impetus for Gray was Jean wanted to be in the Lounge Lizards. He wanted to be in a lot of different bands. And he didn't play any instruments. And he was like, so what? And so our approach to music was, you can't, if you're a musician, you couldn't be in the band. You had to approach music from a painterly point of view. You had to approach music as a sound sculpture. So we were like ripping masking tape off drum heads and playing guitars with metal files and really approaching music in an avant-garde way. And that was really the essence of Gray. And when eventually Jean blew up as an artist in '81 and Gray broke up, I really then started putting a lot of effort and energy 2 years after the Canal Zone party into being a hip-hop impresario, and that was really the beginning of that journey. I think that we should, we should actually, I want to share the stage. If any more questions, share the stage with Freddie. And I don't know how you, let's see, 12:25, I guess I have another 5 minutes. I've got cue cards, 5 minutes. Oh, great. Any other questions? A question for?
Quick question back.
Sure.
Thank you very much. My name is Roddy, 80s baby, born and raised in Brooklyn. Also Haitian American, so Basquiat's the best artist I think of all time. And so it's really, really powerful to be here. And so just to bring it back to Graffiti Rock specifically, you mentioned that there were some parts of it that you kind of cringed at, and I'm sure parts that you're proud of. If it's not an awkward question, like which parts of that, whether it's what we've seen or behind the scenes, are you cringing most about? And also, what are you most proud about, and what led to both of those moments for you?
Well, it's interesting. I was just sitting with my sister, and we were looking. I was talking to her. Oh my God, here I come. I'm gonna beam in like Star Trek. And I thought, what? Why did I choose that idea? What maybe nobody forced that on me. I was like, I know what I do. I want to beam in at the beginning of the show. And later on, I thought, why? I was teaching for 8 years at Howard University, teaching screenwriting and directing. And I remember showing the show to my students, and they laughed at that moment. I was like, oh God, what did I do? And I thought about, why did I make that choice? And I've thought about that for years. And something, I've actually come up with a very interesting answer. I don't know if it's a justification or a rationalization or something to make me feel better, but I think it was actually kind of interesting. In those early days of hip hop, and again, as I said, when it traveled around the country, went to LA, it became very gangster focused, became much harder. In the beginning, it was much more about the party, much more about having fun. I really think at the time, and I'm not making any excuses here, I really think at the time, when I thought of beaming in, and I thought of Star Trek, and I really believe, and Fred is from Brooklyn, and he's from New York, and he can back this up or not. But it felt to me like the kids in New York, the Black and Puerto Rican kids in New York who really made this culture happen, were for the most part, were Afrofuturists. They were alchemists in the sense that they were taking very little, 2 turntables and a microphone, a piece of linoleum, stolen cans of spray paint, what have you, and what they eventually did as alchemists, turned a movement into a multi-billion-dollar global, most influential movement that I think the human race has ever seen, frankly. It transcends rock and roll. It transcends the Belle Epoque of Paris in the 20s. It transcends almost every great cultural movement. It was something in which working class and poor kids gave themselves a voice and then globally gave other poor and working class kids a voice. And the evidence is the fact that breaking is an Olympic sport next year, by the way. But in the process, that's right, in the process of creating this culture and this movement, and let's not forget New York is a very important element in terms of the many fathers that New York, that hip hop has. A lot of people say, oh, well, this, I'd like to think that, New York City is the mother of hip hop, and it has many fathers. James Brown is a father. Disco is a father. There's many fathers. There are many fathers to hip hop culture, but the mother is New York City. I think, as an outsider, I'm not from New York. As an outsider, I could see it objectively that a lot of people couldn't see. It was the competitiveness of New York, because there's nothing more germane to hip hop culture than competition. It was the multiculturalism of all these different kinds of people together living side by side, block by block, of all kinds of races and backgrounds, by the way. You don't see that in Chicago or Houston or LA, where black people are warded off into places like Houston in the 5th Ward, or LA in Compton or Watts or whatever. New York is a mix. People are mixed together, very much so, much more so. And hip hop culture, as Grandmaster Caz once said, hip hop didn't invent anything. It reinvented everything. And it took that intensity of a cultural appreciation that is very much a part of New York, I think, is also a very important element to hip hop culture. And again, I'm saying this as an outsider. Freddie, as a New Yorker, can contend this. But I wanted to say that, well, I guess I've said a lot about hip hop, and it's kind of gone off topic a little. But I guess I'm most proud about Graffiti Rock being the first American hip hop show, and Run DMC's performance, I think, was just killer. That's my most proud part of that show. I think we're there. We're 12:25, and I don't know, is Freddie going to take the mic and introduce the show?
Yep. Introduce Wild Style. Thank you so much.
Fab Five Freddy, my dear friend for 40 plus years.
Thank you, Mike. Just briefly, hi, everybody. It's great. I just got down here a little while ago up the train from New York. Just a few minutes about, and everything Michael said was 100%. But about the film Wild Style, the idea was myself as an aspiring artist, aspiring cultural agitator, and a culture maker and disruptor. I had the idea to create a better image for young Black and Latino youth, specifically myself wanting to be a visual artist. Whenever Black and Latin people were depicted in the press, it was almost always negative and not a good look for a young kid with a baseball cap on. Things that are just universal fashion around the world were not a cool thing. And I thought we could make a film showing what we do on the creative side as we now all see as a part of hip-hop culture. The connection between these elements didn't really exist, to show that the graffiti, this music, the rapping, the DJing, the visual art, the breaking, to show that they were all one thing was the idea I had. And I met this guy from the downtown scene in New York, from the underground film scene, named Charlie Ahern. I pitched him this idea, and he said, let's make a movie. So we embarked on research, and I knew about hip hop. I'm from Brooklyn, but the hip hop music scene was developing in the Bronx, as well as a lot of the graffiti artists that defined this as a visual art were from up there, and began to work with Charlie on what became this film, Wild Style. And one of the ideas we had was to use the actual people that were doing the culture themselves, to use them in the film playing roles close to what they actually were doing. So that means it's one of the earliest visualizations, film-wise, of what it looked like in the place where it was happening. So that's the original rappers, some of the original rappers that laid the foundation. Cold Crush Brothers, fantastic. Grandmaster Flash, Grand Wizard Theodore, the people that really laid the foundations musically. A lot of the pivotal graffiti artists, the Rocksteady crew, of course, the premier breakdance crew, until Michael became this impresario and had the rival crew to the Rocksteady crew, the New York City Breakers. And yeah, man, our intention in making this film was to rock the house for people in New York City. We had no visions that we'd be this would be such a huge global thing 50 years later. This was not ever foreseen, but our intentions were to get it right for our core audience, homies in the hood, and our arty, underground, downtown film friends. Those were our aspirations. So Wild Style, 40 years old, the first time people got a sense of hip hop culture around the world. Trying to raise money for the film was impossible in New York. Charlie Ahern and I put our little package together to show what this was. Barely any rap records were out at the time. Maybe Rapper's Delight had come out, but they all were like, oh, fad, yeah, right, whatever, nice, but no thanks. But it was Europe that gave us the first money. German television gave us a nice chunk of money, as well as British television, the Fourth Channel. And with that chunk of money, we were able to go back to some of the original investors that realized, oh, this is going to happen, so they wanted to jump on board. And that's how we got hip-hop's first film done, Wild Style. Please enjoy, and that's it. See ya.